This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 531, entitled, "Why are Masculists such misogynists?" Description. This flyer spells out clearly, in the case of fluffies and fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts, why masculists have such a hatred of them, giving very powerful reasons why this hatred is justified and needed. The flyer itself. Why are Masculists such misogynists? By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. It's certainly true that masculists are misogynists against fluffies and fluffy feminists, whom we masculists have a real hatred for and whom we aim to wipe out by punishing them severely, by having nothing to do with them, thus forcing them to rot on the shelf. So what is the source of this very strong word that is hatred instead of anger? In short, masculists have a hatred of fluffies because masculists see them as man-slavers, and masculists have a hatred of fluffy feminists for their butchery of fathers in the divorce courts. This flyer aims to explain and to convince you that this masculinist hatred is fully understandable and justifiable, although if you confine yourself to feminist literature, you probably give the word misogyny negative connotations, since that has been the aim of feminists for the past half-century or more. I'll confine myself to discussing two major ways that women deeply oppress men, that the masculists hate them for. I'll start with the fluffies and their man-slavery of men. A fluffie, based on the word fluff, is a masculinist label for a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the labour and money of a man for decades of his life. That is, he works for her and she does not pay him. So by definition, he is a slave to her, a man-slave to her. Masculists state that it was men who liberated women from household drudgery by giving women science-based medicine, and with that, a life expectancy of 85 years. Men gave women household gadgets, the pill, and higher education. These things allowed women to have a career window of half a century. So the masculists now point the finger at women, telling them that since they have a life expectancy of 85 years and a career window of half a century, even if they stay at home for some years while the kids are small, they have a strong moral responsibility to FIP up, that is, to become FIPs, equals financially independent persons, by bothering to get career competent educations so that they become FIPs as adults and not expect fluffy style to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man. Masculists put enormous moral pressure on women to FIP up, or be seen by masculists as being hated man-slavers, since the masculists, fluffydom is man-slavery, and man-slavery is slavery, and hence hated by the masculists, who punish fluffies severely by forcing them to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and utterly rejected by masculisted men, both socially and sexually. To masculists, man-slavery is 1,000 times larger problem than was Negro slavery in the 1800s in the US, due to the numbers. There were several million Negro slaves in the slave period in the US, while there are several billion man-slaves in the world today, whom the masculists are out to liberate from decades of man-slavery at the hands of fluffy, man-slaving parasites. To have one's masculinist consciousness raised means, effectively, to see fluffydom as manslavery and manslavery as slavery. Most people today see Negro slavery as a moral abomination and something definitely worth of being hated. It was a war issue in the US in the mid-1800s, killing over 500,000 US soldiers in the US Civil War. For most women, it takes a bit of imagination to see fluffydom as manslavery, since most women know nothing of masculism and so by default have traditional expectations of men, since feminism teaches them nothing about how women oppress men. Feminism is definitely a philosophy that pushes the idea that gender oppression is a one-way street, that it is men who oppress women and it is women who are the oppressed. These one-sided feminists, whom Masculists label monoconscious, that is, have only had their feminist consciousnesses raised, annoy the Masculists, who are usually bi-conscious, that is, they have read the feminist books and understand the feminist case against men, but are also very aware how women oppress men and argue, in fact, that women oppress men worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes against men last decades, which makes them more serious than the relatively minor ways in which men oppress women. To Masculists, even rape is seen as relatively small beer compared to women's decades-lasting man-slavery, living off the labour and money of a man for decades of his life, while the woman has not bothered to fip up, who chose to become a fluffy crapper at high school, that is, who chose to study fluffy crap majors, the soft option, the intellectually easy, intellectually lazy option, that used memory-based learning rather than analytic thought, that is, subjects such as English literature, foreign languages, history, geography, etc., rather than math and the sciences. These fluffy crappers were then forced to study more fluffy crap majors at college due to their lack of prerequisite STEM subjects studied at high school, needed to enter STEM fields and the professions at university. A fluffy crapper then typically screws around in her 20s, not saving much, then in her 30s, when her biological clock is ticking hard, realises she can't afford to buy a middle-class house to raise her kids in, so starts looking for some gullible, ignorant, in brackets, of masculist and MGTOW that's been going their own way ideas, close brackets, man-slaveable man, to parasite on for decades of his life, having him pay for her to live in a middle-class house that she raises her kids in, that he pays for. To Masculists, this is man's slavery and is hated. A fluffy is hated by Masculists due to her massive gender crime against a man, manslaving him for decades, having him work for her when she has a career window of half a century, so should feel a very powerful moral obligation to fip up or be treated by the Masculists as a manslaving criminal to be severely punished by not